the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, A Murder on the Moon, the borders of science and science fiction, and the future of cybernetic warfare. Plus, we continue our ongoing audiobook serialization of Timothy Zahn's Cobra, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. Today, we welcome Baen Assistant Editor Sean CW Korsgaard to the interviewer's chair here at the Baen Free Radio Hour. Sean wears many hats at the Baen office, and we're excited to have him help out here on the podcast. This week, he sat down with editor Stephen Lawson and contributors Sean Patrick Hazlett, Phillip Kramer, and Monalisa Foster to discuss the new anthology, Robosoldiers. Thank You for Your Servos, which is out now in trade paperback and ebook formats. But first, the news. Head on over to Baen.com and check out this month's free fiction and nonfiction. First up is this year's Jim Baen Memorial Award-winning story, Man on the Moon by Elaine Midco. The trip to the moon was truly once in a lifetime for Sasha Venditti. She'd saved 9 years to get there. It was, in her opinion, worth every penny. But she soon finds her vacation cut short when Andrin Lamar Jr., son of one of her firm's biggest clients, gets himself into some serious trouble. Sasha thinks she can't possibly be the one to call. She's on the moon, right? But so, it seems, is Lamar. Now it will take all her wits and wiles to solve what may well be the first murder on the moon. And while you're on the site, check out Jim Beal's latest nonfiction article, Borders, From the First Sumerians to the Last Starfighter. Our lives are circumscribed by borders, both man-made and natural, from lines on a map to rivers and mountain ranges. In this month's free nonfiction article, Jim Beal looks at the concept of borders, beginning with the earliest city-states and continuing into the present and on to the future, as he explores how borders have impacted science fiction literature. The lines have been drawn. That's Elaine Midco's Man on the Moon and Borders, From the First Sumerians to the Last Starfighter by Jim Beal, both free to read right now at Baen.com. Michael Z. Williamson's Target Terror may clock in at over 700 pages, but we're sure it will leave you wanting more page-turning techno-thriller action. So for the month of June, we're offering ebook discounts on all our techno-thriller backlist titles, including Tom Kratman's Countdown series, John Ringo's Paladin of Shadows series, and the Dead Six books by Larry Correia and Mike Kupari. Details and a complete list of books are available at Baen.com. And that's it for the news.
Welcome, listeners, to the Baen Free Radio Show. I am Sean CW Korsgaard, Junior Editor and Media Manager here at Baen Books, hosting live and loud for the first time. And with us today, we have 4 of the contributors and the editor of our upcoming Robosoldiers anthology. Joining us, we have Stephen Lawson, the editor, Sean Patrick Hazlett, one of the contributors and the editor of our Weird World War anthologies, Monalisa Foster, and Phillip Kramer. So to start the show, gentlemen and lady, introduce yourselves to our listeners. Starting with you, Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Lawson. This is my first anthology that I'm editing for Baen. I've written a couple of stories that they've published for the Jim Baen Memorial Short Story Award. I served 5 years in the Navy on 3 deployments. Currently, I'm a major and a helicopter pilot for the Kentucky Army National Guard, actually flying tomorrow, so I got some planning to do right after this. But happy to be here, happy to talk about whatever with you, Sean, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sean?
So my name is Sean Hazlett. I am a editor of the Weird World War III and Weird World War IV anthologies. I have a story in Robosoldiers called Manchurian. I'm an Army veteran. I spent 5 years in the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment fighting like the Soviets, now Russians, and I am consistently appalled at their battlefield performance thus far.
Phillip?
I'm Phillip Kramer. I'm a biomedical researcher at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in North Carolina. I have been doing biomedical research in the field of aging and muscle metabolism for quite a while. I've been also doing writing most of my life. I met Stephen back in 2017 during the International Space Development Conference, where I received the grand prize for the Baen Memorial Short Story Award. And yeah, that was my first introduction to Baen and all of the great work that they're doing. And really what attracted to me to that award, as well as contributing to this anthology, is their absolute demand for hard sci-fi, and that's exclusively what I do, and I was happy to be a part of it.
Happy to have you. And last but certainly never least, Monalisa.
Hi, I'm Monalisa Foster. I'm a writer of science fiction, mostly space opera. I've been in several anthologies now, different genres. My claim to fame is that I am a naturalized American citizen, and I came here when I was young from Romania. I have a degree in physics, and I've worked from everything from engineering to radiation oncology.
So with backgrounds like that, not surprisingly, Robosoldiers has a very eclectic mix of some stories. So I guess I'd just like to ask you each about what inspired your stories, if that's all right. So Stephen, you did not contribute a story, but putting this together, what was your inspiration?
So second to last story, you'll actually find my name under it. It's called Nightingale. So yeah, the idea for the anthology, actually there's a subtitle on it that says, "Thank you for your servos." And I just get weird wordplay in my head sometimes, and it turns into other ideas. I had this idea for a novel about this washed up, burned out combat veteran robot that's maybe missing some parts and some components from his combat time. He's been demilled, and some little girl adopts him, and they go save the world together on some mission to fight human trafficking or something like that. And I thought about the idea more. I spent a couple days on it, and I'm like, you could put that title on a lot of things, and maybe it could be an anthology by veterans about combat robotics, and it just kind of evolved from there. I don't think this would have happened without Sean Hazlett, because he's done a lot of groundwork on other anthologies, and he's kind of coached me on this stuff. So I said, "Hey, Sean, how do you approach this kind of thing?" He sent me a proposal template that I sent to Tony once I had it all filled out. And then I just really had to find authors to fill it in. I sought primarily veterans, but I had friends like Monalisa and Phillip and Martin that are very smart on some other things like medicine and programming and things like that. So I think I rounded it out well with 3 civilian contributors, and the rest are veterans. I asked them to write inside their MOSs or specialties or ratings, and they did that. And I think it's pretty well rounded out based on that concept.
And before I go to our other contributors, thank you for correcting me. Tell us a little bit about Nightingale.
So Nightingale is kind of a story that I wanted to write for a long time, and I had this idea of, my story that won the Jim Baen Memorial Short Story Award it's called Homunculus. It was published in 2018, and it's about this little teeny tiny robot that's piloted remotely, which is kind of far-fetched based on quantum entanglement used as communication. So I didn't go quite that far with the science fiction aspect of this. I have little AI-powered robots that are going to save a guy, but they're basically little teeny tiny commandos that can go enable self-rescue. So they've got equipment strapped to them, like guns and lockpicks and saws and things like that, and explosive charges, so they can go rescue this guy. The guy they're rescuing is actually their programmer and designer. He's also kind of a spy, and his wife has basically lured in this helicopter pilot, and she influences him in a number of ways, and uses him to go rescue her husband. So that's basically the plot of the story for Nightingale. Nightingale is it's a reference that he gives her to Florence Nightingale because she's a flight surgeon. So she's a very resourceful woman. I'll just put it that way. The story has a lot of layers. Their last name is Moreau, so it's kind of an uplifting or uplift. I can't remember the term for elevating another creature into kind of a human status. So they're kind of doing that with the artificial intelligence and giving them extra abilities that they wouldn't have otherwise. So there are layers to it. Nobody's going to get all of the layers, but there are a lot of them there.
Sean, tell us a little bit about Manchurian, although given your next Weird World anthology, I'm a little afraid to ask where this one goes.
So if you enjoy Russian prison tattoos, Chinese super geniuses, and CRISPR superviruses and rare earth metals, you'll enjoy Manchurian. So it's a novelette, and the idea originally came from a presentation at a conference called DEF CON 19, I think it was. And it was given by the chief medical officer. Yes, they have a chief medical officer at the Intel Corporation. And what he talked about was sort of some of the things that you can do with CRISPR weapons. And so I did some research, and it turns out that there's a specific gene that codes to the kind of the Han Chinese phenotype. So if you could literally today engineer a weapon that affected everyone in the world except 96 to 97% of folks with Han Chinese genes. So what the Chinese do is they unleash this virus through a proxy, which is a Pakistani scientist, because what the impact of the gene is, it targets your skin. So if your children go outside, their skin is burned essentially. So you've crippled much of the world from the sense of economic potential and things like that. So that's kind of how it starts. The main protagonist has a daughter who has this crippling illness. And there's been several wars with China. Russia is fractured into several different nation states, and there's a keen interest in a rare earth metal mine that the Russians actually have been building for several years. At the same time, the world is kind of the Americans have gone all in on cybernetics, and the Chinese have gone all in on genetics. So it is a kind of a formulation or a projection of what that might look like in 2070.
Now, Philip, tell us about Operation Meltwater.
Yes, this was a really fun story to write, and I detailed a little bit of my process on my blog. And if you're interested in reading that, it's at pakramer.com. It was funny when I was asked to do this story or write a contribution. I went back and forth for a good 11 of the 12 months that I was given to write this thing. It was really the last month that I did all the writing. And a lot of that was because, I really wanted to, one, make this kind of reflective of some area of my specialty. Two, I wanted to try to be as original as I possibly could be, but I didn't. So like you were saying earlier, I'm not a member of the military, never have been. I didn't want to write from that point of view so much because I felt like I was the outsider. But it wasn't kind of the end of the road there for me, because scientists have their role to play too in warfare. There's a lot of people making the tools by which war is made. So and there's been a lot of history of scientists with their tools, their inventions used for war when they really didn't want it to be. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll make my point of view from the scientist's the world. And so I chose kind of an older scientist who had this idea of sending a probe to Enceladus, one of the icy moons of Saturn, and he got this great NASA grant to work with his scientific instruments company and build this great device that would go to the moon. And yeah, he was really excited to go through all phases of this and build a prototype. And the story starts when they're out on the East Antarctic ice sheet and they're testing the prototype, and he's kind of saddled with a few NASA engineers there to help him put the prototype through its paces. And it's not until he's there and running those tests that he realizes the NASA engineers aren't who they seem. They're actually members of, they're covert mission specialists. They're there to kind of take his technology and use it for, more nefarious purposes, I guess. And this is kind of a future where, I had to do a lot of background research on, the geopolitical landscape on this, but I did come across several articles that described, what Russia might do following the end of the Antarctic Treaty, which is set to expire in 2048. And some of those articles are like, well, they have all these icebreakers, they have all of these ice-capable vehicles. They're not going to retire those, they, especially with warming and stuff, and all of the Arctic ice melting. They might put that to use in Antarctica, and if they controlled both poles, then they would have really the mobility advantage in any war. So I went along with that. This is post 2048. Russia has kind of annexed the entire continent, and really the U.S. is doing everything that it can to get them off, because they foresee war coming, and if Russia holds the poles, then that will not end well for the U.S. So, yeah, it's really the scientists' effort to, not necessarily stop, but prevent the consequences of the military engineers from using his creation, his NASA probe, for really destructive means.
A different kind of Cold War. Monalisa, tell us about resilience.
So resilience came out of what was happening at the time that I was writing this with the pandemic going on. And since I had worked with clinical trials, one of the more interesting aspects of working with that was the difference between what a patient perceived that they needed versus what we as researchers would sometimes provide for them. It wasn't always lined up. So I started by writing about this woman who had some traumatic event happen to her. And the way that they were treating her was with a brain implant to help her with her PTSD. And this implant would manifest as an intelligent agent that would basically talk her down when she was having one of these episodes. And it's about the failure of that intelligent agent to do its job, because among other things, it was approaching it from kind of this touchy-feely, women helping women overcome things by talking them out or saying, oh, everything will be all right. That doesn't always work for people. Sometimes you need to do other things that are a little bit more active and kind of fight back, as it were, even if it's kind of a pretend fight back, in order to get the kind of closure that you need. So that's kind of what was the seed for this particular story.
Now, one of the things I do love about Robosoldiers as an anthology is that you have a wonderfully narrow theme, yet manage to have such a strong variety of stories, even in the four we're discussing here. Did that surprise you to see the level of detail and variety among your contributors, Stephen?
No, that's by design. So I'd done a course that's called ILE is the old name for it, but it's the Command General Staff Officers course, Common Core. Just like I completed it like the year before, but we talk about all domain warfare like sea, land, air, cyber, and space. And I thought, I want to get into all of those. So who do I know that can write in all those domains? And people tackled all of them. Like we've got orbital warfare, we've got lunar warfare, and Philip tackled Antarctic warfare. I mean, you're talking about future treaties that expire, like the Outer Space Treaty, and T.C. McCarthy got into that too. So I knew people that could tackle each domain. And actually, Tony Weisskopf recommended Philip Purnell for the naval angle. I could have gotten into that myself because I was enlisted, but he was a surface warfare officer and much more qualified to write naval strategy than I am. And he did a wonderful job with that. So no, it's by design that we've got the breadth of warfare domains that we do in the anthology.
And at least one connected thing to that, as much as I love the thank you for your servos pun, did it surprise you that people did not come with a lot of these punny stories, but instead a lot of hard-hitting, gripping military science fiction that sometimes goes in some scary, heartwarming, or exciting places?
Also doesn't surprise me at all because I didn't tell most of them what the subtitle was going to be until just before publication, because I'm a very inherently paranoid person. I thought that's kind of funny. Like I could see somebody like making that a short story or something, and then I lose all my thunder. So I didn't even tell them that part of it until much later. I just said most of the titles for the emails were military robotics anthology. So we went with that. A couple of them are very dark. Sean Hazlett writes horror normally. Weston Osh writes horror normally. And those are some grisly, horrific stories. The people that I've given contributors copies to so far, I put little bookmarks in there and say, don't read this unless you're in the mood for horror, because it's pretty bloody. Monalisa's story is a little dark, but I really appreciate what she did with the healing process in that too. A couple of them are very funny. Richard Fox, his story is a little bit grim, but he's got a great running joke in there that I don't want to ruin, because I was halfway through editing it and I realized what he was doing, and I stopped and I laughed. I was like, I'm so stupid. This is an obvious joke and it's very funny, but I didn't appreciate it until I was almost done editing it. I think Philip's story, Operation Meltwater, has a lot of good humor in it. It's a fun story. I think Martin's story is a very fun story. Today I Go Home, which it's a spinoff of his, it's in the same world as Today I'm Carrie, which is his first novel. And then Matt Wrighton's story at the beginning, Higher Ground, is a very fun story too. So you got a mix. I mean, it's all flavors for all people kind of thing. You get a buffet of flavors in the anthology.
And I guess to ask our three contributors, when you first heard the title and the subtitle, what was your reaction?
So I'll say that, I'm always happy to hear a good pun. And so this was no different. I was not at all expecting it, but, knowing Stephen, it made total sense. Yeah, and my story being a little on the side of humor, I thought it went well.
I thought it was cute.
I think once they read my story, I think they're going to think the joke's on them.
I will admit, half the fun while doing the publicity for this book has been seeing the wide variety of reactions to everything from the title to the contributors list. But with the release tomorrow, and for those of you listening to this in a few weeks, buy Robosoldiers wherever fine books are sold, and also Amazon. I'm really excited to hear what people think of these stories, because it really does reflect there is sort of this nasty stereotype with military science fiction that it's all either just military fiction with lasers or somewhere between Starship Troopers, Hammer Slammers, just action and science fiction. And here you have a lot of not just variety, but really insightful, educated stories that tap into any number of futures where we could actually go into. And like I said, that variety we've seen from our writers is kind of incredible. I guess as 4 authors who have written a lot of military science fiction, is it nice to have an anthology that showcases and flexes that diversity that we can see in the genre in terms of storytelling, themes, science?
I'll
think
start.
that's-
Go ahead, Monalisa. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think that all stories are about people, no matter what genre that they're in. And that's the thing that I like to focus on. So for me, the genre isn't so much the thing as the characters. The genre is more or less the setting. I mean, I realize that there's other things that go into it, but for me, stories are always about characters.
I agree with that. And I write from the same angle. I write about relationships a lot. Monalisa was one of the first people to read some of my draft concepts for this. So I focus on relationships, and I layer technology and the military environment on top of that. Mine's a weird twisted love triangle with some robots and some helicopters and things like that over top of it. So I totally agree with that. It's people first.
Sean or Phillip?
So the thing I liked most about it was being able to experiment with potential futures from a geopolitical standpoint, and then throw people into the mix and see what happens, see how they react in terms of the character and the lengths that they'll go to save somebody, and some of the horrific things that have to happen. And it you can go to really scary places if you just project where things could turn out based on the current set of technology and technological innovation, current geopolitical trends, and just kind of what's in the art of the possible. So I really enjoyed it, and it also forced me to really focus on a specific topic. It wasn't like lots of candy, like, oh, I can go and think about this. Oh no, I want to go there. It's much easier when you're constrained in writing, because it really brings out the creativity while you're still focused on that one thread of coming up with a story that fits the theme of the anthology.
Yeah, you were Stephen saying, there's a lot of layers to your story, and I think that's true of all the stories that I've read so far, especially yours, Sean. There's a lot of layers in there, to the point where, like, it was very obvious that you had done research, and that was, or at least had a wealth of background experience to draw from, because you had all these acronyms that made sense for all of these different devices. And one of the things that was a little amazing to me was, the entire point of, or I guess the technology behind my story is this nuclear powered probe that can tunnel through the ice. And I was reading yours, and it's like, you had a nuclear powered probe that was tunneling through like rock and dirt and stuff. And I'm like, that's really amazing that two minds can, come up with the same technology that doesn't even really exist. And that's
to give full credit where credit is due. So that's part of it was a subterrane. So TC McCarthy had a whole series back in 2010 where they had subterranes. Now I don't know if they were nuclear powered, but when I looked at the research, the Russians or the Soviets had worked on one in like 1972. So I went and delved into, exactly what would that look like. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I appreciate that, because I felt bad. I called TC in advance. I'm like, hey man, is it okay if I like take your idea and play with it? He's just like, go ahead, run with it.
Yeah, and I wasn't even aware of those the subterraneans, but yeah, it's interesting. And that's what I love about sci-fi the most, and that's really eye-opening for me writing military sci-fi. Is I tend to think of and I guess in the shoes of a futurist. Sci-fi is great for coming up with all of these well thought out technologies that could in one day actually come to pass, and they could be the future. And with military sci-fi, that future can almost be scary. You think about technologies that would come into the future. Well, for warfare, you can't avoid thinking about what kind of technologies could be used. So it can be both scary and eye-opening.
And I think you're bringing up an interesting point, Philip, and General Hogan, Major General retired Stephen Hogan wrote the forward for this, and he talks about like funding streams and how technology comes about. I mean, obviously you need somebody to pay for research, and I know that's a qualm for a lot of scientists, like where do I get the funding for my research? So he talks about in the forward, like a lot of advancements are made, you know, on Civil War battlefields. How do we keep pain at a minimum for these people? How do we feed them? How do we resupply them? And I mean, would we have rocket science if we didn't have rockets to kill other people? Probably not. I mean, most of our rocket scientists were stolen from Germany after World War II. So that's how we got to the moon, is rocket scientists from Germany. So I think you bring up a good interplay. I mean, there's the interplay in the military between business and military staff, where we take terms from each other and concepts from each other. But we also, science relies a lot of the time on governments for funding, and what are governments most interested in is warfare a lot of the time. So necessary evil, but it does result in a lot of scientific advance.
And
Our scientists are better than your scientists.
That's true.
you both kind of touch on something that's been present with this anthology, and in addition, Sean Patrick Hazlett's most recent Weird World War anthology is that you can touch on headlines and technology even without intending to, especially with as much as drones and robots and warfare always attract headlines. I mean, just past week alone, we had a big story break about some military contractor pitching crowd control drones to the police that use tasers and stuff for crowd control. And then sometimes you have a World War anthology drop as Russia invades the Ukraine. And sometimes you have all these well-researched stories and the various places we could go in the future. And sometimes, even as the anthology is being put together, sometimes the headlines get ahead of them, like with base renaming. I guess
Still not over yet. Still not over yet. It's going to be for Fort Gavin, still possible.
Fight it, Sean.
We can only hope. I mean, Fort Liberty is one step above Fort Law, but that is, it's interesting to see the ways that the sci-fi stories make the jump from the book page to the front page, and how some of the strange ways they can do that.
I think that's the trick for futurists, is doing enough research in the present to try to predict the future. And so, you know, when things like that happen, sometimes it's not entirely coincidence. It's people sitting down reading those headlines, but also, you know, reading the articles and really the in-depth stuff behind a lot of the geopolitical landscape, and making a prediction where it can go, not just with politics, but with technology.
And to your point, Sean, the Chinese have taken note of this because they looked at what American authors were writing in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then they saw that we put a man on the moon and saw how it inspired a future generation of scientists. So the Chinese have taken note of that and are actually encouraging and investing in that. So as an example, if you look at the next Worldcon, there's going to be one in Chengdu. The Chinese are realizing that if they encourage science fiction, it could help inspire, like as it did in the United States, a future generation of scientists, and then lead to technological dominance. I just wish our politicians were as thoughtful as that. Not that I'm trying to give the Chinese a compliment, but it's a smart thing to do. I wish we would do the same.
Anybody from the DoD who may be listening, yes, Baen does accept checks. But that is an interesting point, is that you're right. It's strange to see some of the ways that sci-fi makes the jump into the real world and even real world conflicts. But at least one thing that has been on the more positive side of things is that Robosoldiers was one of the books we sent out in all of our Memorial Day care packages. And it's been really nice hearing what some of the folks out on the front lines and stuck on grunt duty think about a lot of our stories. And I guess with two veterans and two genre authors here, what's it like knowing that something you wrote strikes a chord with people out there on the front lines?
So I can speak to that. My deployments in the Navy, there's a lot of boredom, there's a lot of hard work, and kind of going insane for a little while you're deployed. But I read a lot while I was deployed. And some of those books were just like my mental escape from just this monotony of being stuck in the Mediterranean on this cold, dark, soulless ship, just doing this nonsense. Yeah, it's not nonsense, but doing the things I was doing. So I really appreciate that. I went to our ship's library a lot, and I read almost nonstop for my deployments. So I think if I can entertain somebody that's deployed, that's really valuable and meaningful to me, as much as anything else that I do. If I can make somebody else's life better, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that you sent those books overseas, and I hope they enjoy it and I don't depress them. Although there is a risk. There's a risk of that.
You need to come with a warning label, Sean.
Yeah, but again, I guess there's some education about the Chinese 36 stratagems and all that good stuff. So I think it's a great thing that you're doing that, and I sincerely hope that they enjoy the stories and really get tuned in to Baen Books and what Baen Books is about, because I don't think there's any other publishing company like it.
Sure.
Sorry. Those are mine.
Is that Corgi-san?
That is Corgi-san. He's sounding the alarm because his daddy is coming home.
Oh, come on.
Sorry.
You can Corgi and not show it on camera.
Wrong camera. Maybe next time.
Hold you to it. But
Okay.
well, I guess
Don't worry, my 3-year-old son almost gate crashed. You probably saw like a little flash of like a human head, but he was thwarted by my wife, thank God. So you're not the only one.
He gets very loud. He does.
but
So to answer your question, as an author, one of the things you struggle with is this idea that you have to be really, really mean to your characters, right? Because that's how they grow and that's how you make stories, and kind of balancing out not to be too mean about it. And one of the reasons I call this story Resilience was because I wanted to send the message that no matter how bad things can get, they are survivable, that there is something after. So even though it's dark, it had a happy ending. And that was just a very important thing for me to convey.
Yeah, I think that you speak to themes that are really important to a lot of service members. And sorry to interrupt where you're going, Phillip. But the mental health aspect in the military is a huge thing. It's something that a lot of civilians don't see. I know you see shows and movies where people are struggling with PTSD from combat and things like that, but things like sexual assault trauma, those mental health issues aren't always combat related. There are a lot of things that we deal with from being in weird environments with weird people in all parts of the world that stick with you in ways that they don't for a lot of civilians. So you got to an aspect of military life that is very true to life and is important. It's an important conversation to have in a lot of ways, and I appreciated it. Sorry to interrupt, Phillip, and I'll step off the soapbox now.
No, I think that's a great segue to what I was going to say. Everyone has different perspectives, whether you're a soldier or civilian, whether you go through PTSD, whether you don't. And I think, especially for troops, and again, I'm not speaking from experience, but perspective is a great thing to have. You need to sometimes, having a little escape, read something maybe besides military sci-fi, maybe you read some military sci-fi, but getting perspective, whether it's, a different point of view, whether it's, an outcome that you wouldn't have thought of, or how different people cope with PTSD. It's all educational in one form or another, whether it's technology, whether it's mental health, or whether it's just learning about perspective of war from a scientist who's has nothing to do with war and has really no plans to ever do anything with war. So yeah, perspective.
Well, to circle back to something you brought up earlier, Philip, when you mentioned getting started on the story in the 12th month, in the 11th month, I'm the same way, no criticism. Everybody has a different approach to writing for these anthologies. If you guys don't mind, let's go a little bit into your writing processes. How did you go about writing your story for this? Start with you, Stephen.
Okay, so I don't really write stories unless it's something where I'm driving or working out and I start getting this weird thing in my head that has to come out somewhere. So I guess the anthology is kind of a result of a weird pun and a story that was just gestating in my brain and had to come out somewhere. It needed a vehicle. So I worked with some people and I made a vehicle for it. Sometimes I have a process for things and I try to write, but that's a lot more labored. It's a lot more intensive and it feels like more work than having something that has to escape and I have to make a package for it for the real world. So my process is, I guess, spontaneous combustion in my brain. That's what I do.
Sean?
So if you had to put me on the kind of the plotter pantser axis, I am an extreme plotter. Because if I try to pants, it'll just be like a sentence fragment and then I don't know where it's going. But I start out, think about an overall premise, and then I kind of treated it like I wrote, this isn't exactly the case, but it's almost like I'm writing news articles, right? Where, think of like some Wall Street Journal news articles where you're talking about resources and things that are critical to your economy, and that becomes the motivation for certain nation states. And then I think about what current trends are and what that implies for the history of, how a conflict could emerge between, say, the Chinese and the US and how Russia might be involved. And then I iterate a little bit, and then I come up with a character who is going to live in that world. And then I find a motivation for that character, and then I'll write it, and it'll be terrible. And then I'll rearrange things and rewrite it. And then I probably do anywhere from 10 to 15 drafts. And by the time it's right is when you come up with an idea when it's all done that links everything up. So the way that I did that is very late in the process. I discovered, it's not Sun Tzu, but it's all something in the same tradition, which was these 39 stratagems. And I noticed that everything that the Chinese were doing in my story tied back to one of them. So I was able to reference it and give it a little bit more of a verisimilitude at the very end. And it didn't take that much to add, but for me, it requires an intense polishing process. The first thing I put on paper is not great. So the advice I would give to writers who are just starting out is just get it on paper, and then the real writing comes in the editing process, at least for me.
Philip?
Yeah, I would definitely consider myself more of a plotter than a pantser. For me, all of those, those 11 months, not all of them were spent, just trying to find a story. I kind of spent a lot of that time, searching for original idea to kind of spark the inspiration. And it helps when you've been doing this for a while and you have a folder buried in your laptop called ideas. And you just go in there and you just start scrolling down. And I had to cross-reference several things or cross-check several things because I wrote them down quite a while ago and I didn't even remember doing the research that I apparently did. And one of those ideas was, for a NASA probe, capable of tunneling through ice. So that idea has, been in the folder for a long time. but I couldn't just start writing once I saw that, if you started writing immediately when you had the idea, without doing the legwork, without doing the research, I mean, that's how you end up with stories that, you have inaccurate science, you have plot holes, you have people, doing the Deus Ex Machina, trying to get out of the plot hole with some unrealistic science. So yeah, there's, anything hard sci-fi, you have to do the research. And so I found the cool idea first, the setting. The character came last for me. I really needed to know the world that I was writing in first. Like Sean said earlier, you have to find the thing and then show how people react to it, whether it's political or technology. So yeah, it was just a matter of creating the setting first, looking into all the politics of the region, what could happen, and then really getting into the gritty science detail, making sure, if there is ever a scientist out there working on, small modular reactors, that they're not just going to roll their eyes and throw the book across the room as soon as they look at my story. So yeah, just doing the research, making it, if not accurate, then at least plausible. And then once I have everything down, I get the character, I put him in that situation and see how he would react. And I don't often know how he will react until he's moving through the setting that I've provided. So that's the only kind of pantser type work I do, is just letting the character move through the setting.
Monalisa?
I'm an extreme pantser, for lack of a better term, and I almost always start with the character. So I had this idea about Carly Engel being a military air traffic controller in Germany, because at the time I was learning German so that I could understand German musical theater without subtitles. So I let all of these little things that are going on in my life sometimes intrude with little details in what I'm writing. But the research for this was actually something that I had done for another story. So it came in the form of the difference between an intelligent agent and an actual artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and the different levels that those are. So my understanding has always been that our idea of an AI is at least 100 and 150 years off. It is not as close as people like to think it is, and there's reasons for that. So I took some of the information that I had done research for another story to come up with this idea of this AI implant, and it was very, very tempting for me. I was constantly having to go back and kind of bring myself back to, okay, I'm writing military SF, not a romance, because I really, really, really wanted to turn this into a romance. I wanted her to fall in love with the guy inside of her head. But I figured maybe that probably wouldn't be genre appropriate in this case.
Always next time. And for any aspiring authors listening in, just goes to show, no wrong approach so long as you finish. And I guess to go back again to touch on everyone's stories and the fact that we have some stories that tap into the real world or that might connect with people differently as current events unfold. If you could have readers take anything away from your story, what would that be? And counterpoint, if there's one thing from your story that you hope doesn't come to pass, what would that be? Start with you, Stephen.
So something to take away from my story, and it's something that I thought of a lot because I've been in a lot of different team environments where you get close to people and you get to know all their faults. I think the people taking care of very, I don't want to say high level responsibilities, but the things that you don't want to deal with on a daily basis. Jack Nicholson saying you can't handle the truth. Those things are done by people with flaws. And you get into teams where after a vetting process, you're working with people with flaws. They're not the perfect, robot soldier that's there defending the world with no moral flaws or intellectual flaws without some form of mental illness or or defects. I've got friends that have some physical disabilities that can fly helicopters because we work around things, or people with, they've got some severe depression or some things going on in their lives that they don't like to talk about, but we work together and overcome those things. And that's part of my story. I would say the thing that I hope doesn't come to pass is billionaires with private robot armies, because that would be dangerous. So that's like problem number one in the story, is this guy that can, and I talk about span of control because that's a big thing in the military. We talk about you can't really effectively influence more than 4 to 5 people in a direct line of command. So I get into the flaws of this guy trying to control this giant robot army with just like one single point where he can tell them to do anything as an autocrat, and it doesn't really work on some levels, and the good guys in the story kind of exploit that. So there are span of control laws that I talk about in the very beginning with the guy that's the roboticist. You can't legally, in the world that I have, control more than 4 to 5 robots without a human in the loop for a manned-unmanned teaming environment, so to speak, human-machine teaming. So I hope that people don't get carried away and try to automate, one person can control 100 robot soldiers. I think that's very dangerous. I think robots are inherently amoral, not immoral, but amoral. They don't have moral reasoning inherent in their consciousness, no matter how you program them. So I hope that we take morality into account if we are programming machines to be efficient killers, if we're doing hunter-killer projects like things that DARPA works on. I hope that we factor in human in the loop decision making at all times. I think it's very important.
Sean?
So I'm going to shamelessly crib Sun Tzu. The first lesson is all warfare is based on deception. My story, I think, definitely covers that in multiple ways. In terms of so that would be the key takeaway. The thing that I really, really hope doesn't come true is that's the weaponization of CRISPR viruses, things like that, because what people don't realize is the technological capacity to do this sort of like gene splicing and things like that. It's actually already been done in 2018 by 2 Chinese scientists illegally, but we are within the realm of possibility. And the fact, I don't know if this is a fact, but I haven't really seen anything that indicates there's been any sort of international treaty or anything like that to put the brakes on this stuff. So right now it's something that could be exceptionally dangerous, because CRISPR can be used in beneficial ways as well. So anyway, that's the one thing that would, should keep me up at night, should keep DARPA up at night, should keep the Pentagon up at night. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Phillip?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off something Stephen was saying. I believe I have a quote in my book. It's civilization needs soldiers as much as scientists. And I really, being something that I wish readers would take away from that. But, the issue of morality is, a big one when it comes to designing the future of warfare. And a big theme in my book is that there's never only one way to do something. There's always another way. There's always alternatives. And, I know it's a little hard for actual soldiers when you have orders and you have to do what you're told to, within reason. But, just keep in mind that there's always other options. It doesn't always have to be destruction and violence. When there's nuclear arms at play, then forward thinking and being able to listen to the scientists and not just the soldiers for a solution is always a good go-to. And I guess that plays into what I hope doesn't happen. I hope that, you know, scientists and the military are a lot more forward thinking about, you know, the long-term impacts of what they do to the environment. One, you know, especially with radioactivity being what it is, you release any kind of radioactive substance, it could hang around for a really long time, even if it is in the middle of the Antarctic and, you know, the Antarctic Treaty is expired and no one's going to tell you you can't do it. You know, it's an environment that if it's polluted, it'll stay that way for thousands of years potentially. So yeah, that's it.
Monalisa?
I hope that the thing that does come true is that people realize that everybody is an individual and that the individual is the most important minority on earth. And because of that, things are going to work for them that are not going to work for anybody else and vice versa. And I think that's something that people need to just really look at and understand. As far as things that I'm hoping never come true are like the bad people winning, however you want to kind of define that. I have my own definition of it. And the way that I put it in here, that the group that was responsible for all the bad things that happened to this character were the kind of people that, and I based them on the communists that I escaped from. And I don't ever want to have a world where my kids have to face what I did. So that's my hope, is that those people never come to power.
The wish of every parent. So I guess to bring things to a close, everybody, what are you working on at the moment? And for all of our viewers and listeners at home, if they want to check out you or your work, where can they go? Stephen, start the show.
So current projects, I'm doing some research, life experience kind of exposure stuff, not something I'm going to talk about. I think if I do another anthology or wherever this idea comes out, it would be based in the future of medicine and maybe human machine teaming in medicine. I want to learn more about that. It's fascinating to me. So I'm getting some exposure in things, but not something I'm going to talk about publicly. If people want to look me up, I'm on Facebook. It's, I think, Stephen Lawson.338 is my Facebook profile. And I've got a free, because I'm a cheapskate, WordPress blog at stephenlawsonstories.wordpress.com, which I update periodically. And it links to my Amazon. I've got a collection of short stories on there and a novel called Walk Away that I'm pretty pleased with. I like it. So that's where you can find more of my stuff, on Amazon and my blog.
Sean?
So I'm kind of working on 3 major projects right now. So one is Weird World War III China, which is similar to Weird World War III, the original, except instead of the US and Soviet Union, it's the US and China, kind of future conflict. So that's an anthology. The second thing I'm working on is a novel tentatively called Wormwood Down. And it's based on, very loosely, on the 10,000, Xenophon's 10,000, which was a Greek group of mercenaries that were stuck in Persia and had to fight their way home. Only in this case, there's a extraterrestrial object that crashes into the Russian Far East. A team from Delta is sent in to recover it, and at the same time, the Chinese want it. So you have a Chinese incursion into the Far East, and then you have whatever's in the object. Lots of hard science fiction fun and darkness there, but it's Baen, so at least hopefully it'll be Baen. So I have to let somebody live. We'll see. It'll be a little bit hard for me. And then the third thing I'm working on is I started a YouTube channel called Through the Glass Darkly with Sean. And what I do is I interview writers. I also cover geopolitics, and then anything where the paranormal intersects with military policy. So if you look through the history, there's actually a lot of weird stuff that our government did, particularly the remote viewing program. I've interviewed a remote viewer who was part of that program, Stargate, Grill Flame, Scan 8, and a number of other, Sunstreak, a number of other programs that the DIA did. So anyway, definitely check that out. And then you can find me on SeanPatrickHazlett.com. And then you can get my books, particularly Weird World War III and Weird World War IV, on Amazon or anywhere else books are sold.
Phillip?
I have a number of books that I've been working on and editing over the years. I really, until this project that Stephen asked me to do, I hadn't done anything short, novelette or shorter in a while. So I'm mainly working on long form science fiction, mostly hard sci-fi. I have one book, it's called tentatively Upended. It is complete. I'm trying to get that published. It's, I think, in Baen's slush pile somewhere. So if you want to expedite that, that'd be great. But yeah, so who knows where that's going to get published, but I do intend for it to be a series. It is hard sci-fi about a scientist who gets caught up in really an experiment gone wrong. There's an accident in a laboratory, and everything within a mile radius is made completely weightless, including himself. And so it's a matter of him kind of getting out of that situation and going through the aftermath and learning that, hey, NASA wants to, put a lot of this weightless material to use and get up into space very easily when, gravity is no longer an issue. And so I have stories planned. I'm halfway through or a third of the way through the second book. They'll be, going up into orbit, and then, and then to the moon and Venus and so on. So it's going to be a series, and I hope that, I'll get it published eventually. Other than that, a couple other novel ideas that I'm just starting to outline. And readers can find me at pakramer.com. I don't update that a lot, but I'll post occasional news.
And Monalisa?
Monalisa is working on the third book in Ravages of Honor trilogy. And since I'm stuck on that, I decided to go ahead and start another space opera. And this one's going to be a little bit different. I'm thinking about adapting some Westerns. So I've got some inspiration from some John Wayne Westerns. And Despair Bear and Corgi San are both going to be robots in this Serenity Firefly kind of space opera. So that's what I'm working on currently. I'm going to be at LibertyCon, and I will also be presenting my Viewpoint class at LibertyCon. So if anybody wants to come and say hi, I would love to see them there.
Marvelous.
And I'm on the internet, monalisafoster.com.
Sean Hazlett, are you going to LibertyCon too? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, yes, provided. Today I have to buy a plane ticket and get a hotel room, so that's gonna be my fun for today.
Okay, I won't be there. I know Martin Shoemaker will be there, but you've got at least 2.5 writers if Sean makes it. He's half in the box, half out of the box. But you got at least Monalisa and Martin Shoemaker and maybe Sean Hazlett that'll be there from the anthology at LibertyCon.
TC's going to be there too.
Okay, TC McCarthy. Awesome.
Well, to our guests, thank you for joining us today. And to all of our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us for the Baen Free Radio Hour. You can find a copy of Robosoldiers, Thank You for Your Servos, on Baen.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever fine books are sold. And we do hope you check it out with all haste. In the meantime, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you somewhere in the bookstores.
And now we bring you Timothy Zahn's Cobra. Earth's only hope was the Cobras. The colony worlds Adirondack and Silvern fell to the Troft forces almost without a struggle. Outnumbered and on the defensive, Earth made a desperate decision. It would attack the aliens not from space, but on the ground, with forces the Trofts did not even suspect. Thus were created the Cobras, a guerrilla force whose weapons were surgically implanted, invisible to the unsuspecting eye, yet undeniably deadly. But power brings temptation, and not all the Cobras could be trusted to fight for Earth alone. Johnny Moreau would learn the uses and abuses of his special abilities and what it truly meant to be a Cobra.
It's dead simple, Bai told them, gesturing to the ceiling barely 2 meters above their heads. You first key your targeting lock on the spot where you intend to hit, and then jump, giving your body a backward motion as you do so. He bent his knees and straightened them, simultaneously arching his back. Then just relax and let the computer run your servos. Try not to fight it, by the way. You'll just strain your muscles and make it harder for your subconscious to adjust to having something else in charge of your body. Questions? All right. Aldred, target lock, go. One by one, they all performed the ceiling jump that had been their first introduction to Cobra abilities those 4 long weeks ago. Johnny had thought himself adequately prepared, but when his turn came, he found out otherwise. Nothing. Not even the now familiar servo enhancement effect could quite compare with the essential decoupling of body and mind that the automatic reflexes entailed. Fortunately, the maneuver was over so quickly that he didn't have time to feel more than a very brief panic before his feet were back on the floor and his muscles returned to his control. Only later did he realize that Bai had probably started them with the ceiling jump for precisely that reason. They went through the exercise 5 times each, and with each flawless jump, Johnny's anxiety and general feeling of weirdness eased, until he was feeling almost comfortable with his new co-pilot. As he should have expected, though, he wasn't allowed to feel comfortable for long.
That was another installment in Timothy Zahn's Cobra, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to Sean CW Korsgaard, Stephen Lawson, Sean Patrick Hazlett, Phillip Kramer, and Monalisa Foster. And good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Shirerod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.